Hello, welcome everyone to the Rec Hangout. Sorry we're a bit late today. We've had a few bugs and the ghost in the machine. Today's topic is the importance of candidate experience in recruitment. We've got Gerry Crispin with us. Gerry's the founder of CareerXroads and one of the leaders in the Candidate Experience Awards, which he helps organise. I attended that last year. Excellent event. I'm sure he'll tell us a bit more about that. Alan Whitford from Abtech Partnership is here today as our host, having a few techie issues, so I'm hoping that Alan will be able to join us and ask Gerry some questions and lead the debate. We've got Louise here as well, as always, monitoring our hashtag Rec Hangout, all one word. Please ask questions, please comment, please join in, and also use the Google Plus Q&A app if you're on Google Plus. Alan, can you hear me? Do you want to? I'll hand over to you then, Alan.
How are we doing out there, everybody? Well, let's give it a shot. Hi, everyone. Happy to have you here on Rec Hangout today, and as Louis said, it's on the hashtag Rec Hangout, so be sure to type your questions in for us. There's going to be
Alan, I think we're having
co-host. He's decided to let a client.
Alan, I think we're having some technical issues from you. I can't hear you very well. Yeah, I'm gonna ask Gerry to introduce himself, talk about a bit what he's doing, and see how it sounds your end. Gerry, over to you.
All right. So, what a wonderful opportunity to be here, and hopefully our technical issues will be resolved shortly. But let me tell you a little bit about what's going on in the United States and relative to the Candidate Experience Awards. And there's quite a bit happening as well, I think, in the UK, Europe, and Australia and New Zealand. So I'll just give you an update on pieces of that, and then we can try and get into some of the questions that people might have. For 4 years now, we've been looking at doing something a little bit different about the idea of candidate experience in terms of trying to do a better job in defining it and measuring it. Because we have a lot of conversation, but we don't really have much in relation to standards or in relation to some data. So I'll give you a sense of what's going on last year in this. Last year, we had about 138 companies participate in the Candidate Experience Awards. And I should define award as not something that you're buying, because the reality is we were wanting to be able to measure those companies who were doing a better job in engaging their candidates in a positive way. But we wanted to better understand what practices impact attitude and how bad attitude has to be before some of the behaviors would impact the corporation's performance. So we had 138 companies provide a very comprehensive overview of what they were doing from the point at which candidates were coming to their organization, researching them, applying to them, and engaging them full board. You know, I mean, if they went further down to the interview basis, to the offer, and obviously in the end to coming on board. So all of those practices were built into a comprehensive survey. 138 companies filled that out. 95 of the companies were willing to do something pretty amazing. They were willing to go out and ask their candidates to comment, if you will, to actually rate them and rank them against all of those practices. Were they aware of them? And to what extent did they help in terms of those candidates making a decision? Amazingly, the 92 companies who participated in that part of the awards last year had 46,000 of their candidates participate. And I will tell you that this year we have 150 companies involved in the United States, in North America. And as of to date, with about 4 weeks left, we've already broken the 46,000 number from last year. So I'm expecting close to 75,000 completed surveys this year. All of that data was then given back to each of the companies that that participated. So they got back all of the data that they supplied, all the data their candidates supplied, and an aggregate of all of the data of companies who participated. I find that pretty powerful, and the data, the information, the analysis of that data continues literally today. We have two PhD students heavily engaged for the summer, being supported by one of the volunteers, and digging into a number of the key questions and practices to see where the correlations are most critical. So I want to find out not just what annoys people about the practice, about what's going on in the recruiting process, but what actually impacts their ability to, or their interest in reapplying. I want to know whether or not they would refer others. I want to know if they're going to continue to buy product. And all of that data and those correlations is being given back to the space, to everyone, free. There is no cost. Employers, in fact, have never paid a penny. So that's kind of where we're starting. In the UK, we've done this now 3 years, and we're setting up councils both for Europe as well as for Australia and New Zealand.
Are these mostly companies, Gerry, that you feel are already offering a very good candidate experience? Do you think
there's a self-selection? Louis, I think that's a great question, because on the whole, the companies who are participating probably are more the companies that feel they've already gotten to a particular point. However, I will tell you that two of the questions are Net Promoter Score type questions. And one of them has to do with whether or not you as the candidate would reapply. Another one was a question about whether or not you would refer others. And in using the calculation that's designed into Net Promoter, where you subtract the most negative from the most positive percentages, you can have a number that goes from minus 100 to 100 in Net Promoter Score, and the average Net Promoter Score for the 92 companies who participated last year was 31, which is pretty positive, actually. And the distribution of those 92 went from minus 20 to 80. So there's actually there were several companies between 60 and 80 as a Net Promoter Score that were obviously doing some pretty extraordinary things, because to get that kind of a number, you have to have raving fans among the people who did not get hired. 80% of all of the candidates did not get hired. So to get that kind of a number, you're doing something quite different. And that's what we're trying to engage on. What are the practices that actually are so meaningful that people who did not get hired have that positive reaction to them? So I can talk a little bit about what I think we will uncover and some of the things that I think are just annoying, if you'd like.
Yes, please. Go ahead, Gerry.
And Gerry,
how are you doing there, Alan?
Hey, I'm trying to get back in. Just a quick question. When you're breaking this down, Gerry, is there a differential between, say, the online experience or the offline experience?
I think so. We tried to get practices that obviously are online, like applying to a job, right? As well as in-depth responses from practices that are obviously in real time when people are coming in and interviewing, if they get that far. So we could break up some of the issues related to online versus real time, but we have not done that at this particular juncture. I will say that there is, rather than wait and save it for the end, but there is one practice that happens both online as well as face to face, that has, I think, an extraordinary impact in moving people from a negative, from a neutral to a positive, or neutral to a negative, depending upon how it's handled. And that has to do with in the application. When an individual takes an application, we looked at like the distribution of the amount of time, the variety of questions, and a whole bunch of other kinds of things, and found no correlation to whether or not people would trend negative or positive. It may annoy people if it takes longer to fill out an application, but it was not causing them to change their attitude and their behavior. What we are seeing, though, is that if I leave the application feeling that I did not have the opportunity in the application to get up to bat and hit the ball, to be able to say satisfactorily that I gave you my best shot at telling you what I've got to offer for this job, I would tend negative. If I did, I would tend positive. And what that actually means is if the last question of an application, an online application, was, we've asked you over the last few minutes every question we can think of that's pertinent to this particular job, but is there anything else that you think you should tell us about your skills, knowledge, and experience that you think impacts your competition for this job? Now's the time. If there were a question like that within an application, the result is that the candidate would tend to view that experience as positive, and if there isn't, they would tend more to view that as negative. That's really pretty critical, because that shows up also in phone screen as well as in interview after interview and in the summation of the interview day.
And I think that's a really critical point, Gerry. And I'm going to be writing a blog soon. My brother-in-law, who's been a database guy for years, but right now he's just trying to get a local job, and he's been looking at auto parts stores and places like that. And even though they're local hires, they're sending him into the national recruitment system. And then one complaint he's made to me is he's not getting that opportunity. He's gone into the store and said, "Hi, I want to apply." They've said, "Go online." He's gone online, and now he's lost. And he's not getting that chance because, you know what? He has no retail store experience. He's a database guy. But he knows auto parts and motorcycle parts inside out because he's worked on his own cars and bikes forever. But he hasn't had that question, which is, why would you be relevant? And he could put all that stuff in. All he had was a straight application form. And he, of course, is not even getting into the actual application process now.
Right. So if all of the questions are, rational from the point of view of the employer, but they don't allow for the thinking, the analytics of the potential employee, you change attitudes and behaviors downstream. And so your example, I think, is like a perfect one that we're hearing from these candidates. And I think what we're going to show, the data is going to show almost a direct correlation between those kinds of practices and the tendency towards going towards a negative result. Now, obviously, if nobody cares, and nothing happens, it's not a problem. But what we're also showing is that if you tend negative, there is some clarity that we're getting in terms of exactly what that means for example, in terms of whether or not you would reapply in the future to that company. So what we're finding is that people who end up believing that they have had a positive experience, almost somewhere between 2/3 and 80% of them would in fact reapply to that company in the future. About 2/3 of them, or about 60% of them, would in fact go out of their way to encourage others to apply, to refer others. And if they tend negative, about 1/3 of them would go out of their way to discourage others from applying, and not refer, in effect. And there would be an extraordinary number who also would not reapply. Only about 5% would reapply at that point. So what you're doing is, by treating those people you're not hiring inappropriately, you are changing the kind of friction that you will have in the future to be, in terms of your efforts to identify people, to get people to refer others, and to get good quality candidates who may not be ready today to reapply tomorrow.
And Gerry, have you taken that same sort of a negative reaction out beyond just the application piece, but into the impact on the business? For example, years ago we did research with Total Jobs, and that the people that had a negative experience, about 2/3 said they wouldn't even buy that company's products or services. So there's a bigger impact than just the recruitment impact, isn't there?
Absolutely, and we did not find a correlation with the question about how you would handle future purchases, in part because not every company who participated was retail oriented. And as you looked at companies that were not retail oriented, that question became pretty meaningless. On the other hand, when I filtered out just the retail companies, what we were finding is that for individuals who are negative, about 1/3 of them would go out of their way to take their dollars to some other place. And if they were positive, about 1/4 of them said they would spend more. So we are collecting data against a fairly large number that supports what you basically saw with Total Jobs. And I'm convinced that when you look at your individual data, you're in a position now to put a dollar cost to this for what it means to lose the satisfaction of candidates that you do not hire in terms of your company's downstream business performance.
So for a company's perspective and an HR recruiter's perspective, that should be the one go-to stat they take to the CFO and say, I need more money.
Right. And there's a couple examples of companies now that are quite out there. So I'll give you a couple examples. One is Capital One. From a measurement point of view, probably has gone beyond where almost anybody else has gone, and they are now asking 16 questions of every candidate that applies, whether or not they're hired, and that's about 10,000 a month. They're getting an 80% response rate on the 16 questions.
Oh, wow,
they're scoring.
Huge.
They're scoring in the 60s in Net Promoter Score. They are able to slice and dice by facility, by job, by level, and they are connecting it back to the recruiter as well. And so now the recruiters are receiving monthly scores on not only candidate satisfaction, but also hiring manager satisfaction and other parts of their recruiter scorecard. And on the hiring manager and the candidate, they're stack ranking them and publishing to all recruiters where they stand against all other recruiters.
Well, that's incredibly impressive. Now, Capital One, big financial organization. Bernadette on the Twitter stream would also like to know, well, what's the nature of the types of companies then who've been part of both, the Candies Awards in the U.S. Are they all sort of large companies, or are they niche companies, or is there a mixture? What's the sort of breakdown?
I think that's a great question. So in the UK, we've only had a small number of companies, and they cover the range, but not enough to kind of say we could slice and dice them. So there may be 20 to 30 companies each year have participated from the UK. In the United States, we now have, I think the first year was 25, the second year was about 50 or 60, the third year was nearly 100, and this year is about 150. The distribution is pretty even in terms of the number of the number of people who are hired by each company. So about a quarter of them, about a quarter of the companies that participate hire fewer than 100 people, and about a quarter of the companies hire more than 10,000. So you can imagine there's a big distribution there. In terms of size of company, pretty much the same. There are a number of very small companies who are involved. I think there's a lower limit. I think that a corporation, in order to participate in the Candidate Experience Awards, you have to have a certain number of candidates flow, right? And you've got to get a certain percentage of them responding to you. So if you're hiring between 50 and 100, and you're trying to get maybe 1,000 candidates, you're inviting 1,000 candidates to respond, and you can get 250 of them, maybe 25% of them to respond. You probably are getting data that's good enough to be able to be useful. If you're under that, it probably you're in a more anecdotal mode. You're just not in a data collection mode. So we kind of recommend that companies take a look at it, and 100 hires a year probably would be kind of a minimum.
Okay, so let's talk about the process element that candidates are going through a little bit, Gerry, because
Sure.
you and I have both been candidates as well as recruiters and been on both sides of this. And we've led and been part of the whole revolution and moved to an ATS, or as Jerome Chernick likes to say now, get rid of the applicant tracking because candidates hate being tracked. But we do, and given the fact that he was a godfather of applicant tracking systems, I always find that a hoot. But at the same time, as companies, we do have to track the activities of our recruiters, of our candidates, and we're seeing more dashboards, the stuff that PepsiCo is using now from Broadbean, for example.
Yep.
It's quite interesting. But for the candidate's perspective, I think I'm going to stand up and scream and go, I don't want to be in a process, and actually, I don't care what great ATS you have, I just want a job.
Right.
So how do we get companies to understand that putting people in that process isn't actually a great candidate experience, and yet and merge that with actually their own business requirement?
Well, I'm gonna argue that it could be. That while there are candidates in general are going to say why can't I just call somebody and talk to them on the phone, and then you and I we make an agreement and you hire me and I come in the next day, so yeah, I get it. But on the other hand, maybe I should be telling you a little bit about what my process is here. That I have, in fact, what if I told you, Alan, that I've got 40 jobs that I'm handling personally, and I've got 125 people applying to each and every one of them, and I'm absolutely committed that I have a touch point, that I am able to communicate with each of those 125 people in a way that's consistent with their needs, but I obviously can't do it by making phone calls all day, every day. Just ain't going to happen that way, so I'm going to have to do it a little bit different. So my point being, I think employers, in the first point, need in the research process to be able to tell the truth about what it is they are in fact doing. What kind of recruiting process do they have? Is this a high volume kind of situation? Is this a critical job for the company's future that you have a lot more labor being pushed onto that? So, if we're talking about an executive position at a very high level, you got one person working on, 3 or 4 jobs a year. You know, if you've got an hourly kind of job and you're hiring 100 people a month to do that job, you're just gonna make an automated, you know, system and approach. Telling the truth is going to be critical, but the truth is going to have to come from the kinds of questions that candidates have, not what the employer thinks they need to know. And that's where we start going wrong in this candidate experience issue. We start thinking, well, they need to know how much they lift. They need to know, you know, that it's you know, it's an 8.5-hour day and, you know, whatever. So I get that. We need to be able to say some of those kinds of things, but we also need to listen to the candidate who says, before I even apply, how much did you say you were going to pay for this job? What happens to people after 6 months in this job? Do they get an opportunity to get more money? Do they get an opportunity to move to a better job? Do they get an opportunity to get promoted? Do people who supervise people in this job come from that job, or do they come from somewhere else? You know, there's a whole bunch of questions that I might want to ask right at the front end that never get answered by most corporations. So we can start with the kind of transparency that the candidates want as opposed to how the employers define it.
Well, and I think, Gerry, you're right that the challenge here is that the employers, for the most part, aren't explaining the process up front. I mean, I always used to say, when you get an application, please respond to it and just say, hey, our process is crap. You know, you're not going to hear from us, or let me at least know what I'm in. And what would also be kind of useful in that communications mode is, if you have rejected me, let me know why, because maybe I'll get better next time. And I'll refer back to my brother-in-law again. He's got a range of complaints, and that's been one of his big ones. And interestingly enough, that applies to whether he has made his application directly to the company or via a third-party recruiter, a staffing agency or a recruitment agency, as we call them here. And if you don't give that feedback on, here's what the process is, and here's the result of your application, how can we expect any candidate to believe it was a good process?
Right. And I would tell you that one of the things that staffing agencies, recruiting agencies do better is actually provide feedback. It's one of the, in my opinion, selling points that they have to be able to partner with corporations. They obviously have a stronger capability and to be able to give some feedback. We don't train recruiters, for the most part, to deal with people they're not going to hire. It just isn't done.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of activity in that area. One of the companies, Intuit, in the United States, does in fact go provide formal training to recruiters on how to give feedback. Disney is another one that does an extraordinary job in providing feedback, but most firms either encourage their recruiters to lie or require them to say almost nothing. Yeah. Because they're afraid of the risk of having them say something wrong. So that is an issue that needs to be corrected in the future, and it's one of the key issues that most candidates would want if they're not going forward, and they learned one or two things from a skills, knowledge, or experience level that they could use to improve their candidacy the next time around. We would change, again, a piece of the friction of recruiting.
Absolutely, we would. I'm going to do a quick reset here. I'm Alan Whitford. I'm speaking today with Gerry Crispin from CareerXroads in the U.S. And Gerry's one of the doyens of recruitment and recruitment knowledge. And he and his partner Mark have been researching what goes on in recruitment for more years than I want to think about. Gerry's also very active in the Candidate Experience Awards, both in the U.S. and in the U.K. You can find us on hashtag Rechangout, REC Hangout. Please feel free to ping a question or two in via the hashtag. Louise Triance is actually tracking that for us. And Louis Welcomme, as always, is trying to keep the technology working. And our usual partner in crime, Mark Stevens, is actually out working with a client today. Gerry, we're getting a couple of questions in from the Twitter stream. And of course, Ruth Widnan says, well, a great start to enhancing the candidate experience would be to get employers to just respond to applications in the first place.
Yes.
Yeah, that wouldn't be bad. I agree, Ruth, wholeheartedly with that. Been on that soapbox a long time. And in fact, Ruth, that's what applicant tracking systems were supposed to help us be able to do, was get that quick and relevant response back. Somehow we seem to have lost the plot on that. And Bernadette is back again. And I believe that Bernadette might work for recruiters. She has several clients who have extensive application processes that turn their candidates off. As a recruiting firm, how can we work with our clients to make the application process better for the candidates? So I think Ruth is, Bernadette's essentially saying, how can I, get my companies to actually pay attention to the candidate experience and make it better? Do I have that power as a recruiter to affect that change?
Oh, I think you do. I think the first thing is most candidates view that third-party recruiting firm as a representative of that firm. And so the experience that they have is in part defined by how that third-party person treats you. So if they are part of that whole touch point, so they can help set expectations, they can help ensure that there's feedback. They can create a set of promises and then deliver on them, as long as they are building a partnership with their client firms. And I'm convinced that if we award, and we did, I think 2 years ago, we awarded GE Capital in the UK. They won one of the Candidate Experience Awards 2 years ago. And they brought with them Alexander Mann, whose recruiters actually do the work. So whether you're an RPO, whether you're a staffing firm, the impact that you have in terms of being able to create for your clients an extraordinary candidate experience is there. But I do think that it's in the same way. You have to be able to define what it is that you're doing. You have to be able to measure the fact that you are not only doing it, but doing it in a competitive fashion much better than others, and that there's a dollar value to that to the corporation downstream. And that's really where we're focused.
And what I think is interesting too, Gerry, is that usually when we have this conversation about agencies, people will say, well, a bad agency recruiter really impacts the corporate brand. But I had a conversation with a recruiter a little while ago, and she said, hey, it works the other way around too. Because if the hiring company's processes are really lousy, it impacts my brand as a recruiter, because now the agency blames me for a bad recruitment experience. So I think it behooves both parties to work a lot closer together.
Well, yes, it does. I'm a little bit more radical. All my life I have gotten rid of clients as the first action that I always take. I do not want a shitty client. I have no patience nor capability of dealing with clients who in fact abuse my people or abuse what the services that I'm going to provide. Because it does impact my brand, but it also impacts my ability to manage and motivate people who are willing to fall on the sword to do the right thing for their clients. So I think you have a responsibility as a leader of a staffing firm to ensure that clients who have a lousy environment, who have a lousy process, who have terrible hiring managers, that you don't prostitute yourself by trying to hire people for them if they're not willing to change and improve. It's a matter of standards.
Right. You're right. And it's a brave thing for a recruitment agency to say to a client, go away. But I think, back to Bernadette's question, I think that would actually enhance the process, her ability to influence process. Because essentially, if she would tell her client, hey, if you don't get your process sorted out, you're toast. And most agencies,
in fact, I'll give you the names and phone numbers of all my competitors that you should go get your job done.
Exactly. Away from the agencies for a moment, we've had an interesting question come in from Jovan. I hope I pronounced his name correctly, or her name. Wanted to know if the participants in the surveys, either in the UK or US, did any of them use candidate communities as a primary means of sourcing, and did that actually change, increase, or decrease maybe the candidate experience or the Net Promoter Score?
The answer is no. It's a small number. We did, in fact, ask questions around candidate community. The fact of the matter is that community, at least up until today, is a little bit of a misnomer. Most communities are, in fact, enhanced databases, if you will, where perhaps there's an increase in the ability of the candidate to talk to the employer and the employer talk to the candidate. But to have a true community, you have to be able to talk to each other. So I got to tell you, there's not too many employers who build a database of people, all of whom can talk to each other about what they're doing, about the status of their job, about whatever it might be. It just isn't happening. So I can't measure that really well. I would say that in the United States, in the past year, from a source of hire point of view, only about 3% of the hires are attributed to a community, talent community of some kind. So we haven't seen it yet. Do I think it might in the future? Yeah, I do. I do think sourcing from a group of people who can have a true engagement between each other and the employer could be, a significant advantage. I know Zappos is attempting that right now. We'll see how well that goes.
But Zappos, I'm glad you brought them up. I mean, they're trying something completely radical, aren't they? They're saying, I'm doing away with job descriptions. I'm not putting up job postings. This is our company. These are the kind of people we usually like to hire. And if you think you fit that model, you should apply. If I put that in about the right way?
Well, I would say it a little bit different. I think what they're trying to do is shift the discussion from a current open job to the environment of working, to the interest in working at Zappos. And to do that, they basically said, okay, so we're going to eliminate the jobs, not the job description, but we're going to eliminate a notice, if you will, that we have an open job. We're simply going to say, we have a company, the company has jobs, we want to talk to you about that in the whole context. We'll supply the resources to be able to have that conversation. If you have an interest in working for us and tell us about you, then we're going to consider you whenever we do have an opening, and if we think we want to go forward, we'll tap you on the shoulder. There are some problems with that, because if you join their community and after 5 or 6 months no one's bothered to tap you on the shoulder, and you know that there's been some open positions, you're probably going to have a few more questions to ask. But you know what? I love the fact that they're attempting to change the conversation and focus more on what we're trying to accomplish as a corporation. Do you buy into our culture? Because that's the key for us. And you can't forget that Zappos has been pretty radical in the past and continues to be, that after you join Zappos, after you go through their training, they sit you down in a room and they offer you thousands of dollars to leave. Honest to God, they do.
Right.
And they get something like 10-15% of all people say, you know what, this wasn't what I expected, and I'm going to take your offer, I'm going to take those thousands of dollars, and I'm walking out. Cool. So they have an unusual way of saying, yeah, we'll hire you, but if it's not up to what we said it was, then you need to leave.
I think that's quite interesting. Now, for our UK European viewers who may not know about Zappos, what kind of organization is it?
It sells shoes online. I mean, it's not complicated. Um, and Tony Say, who founded the company and runs the company, wrote a book about happiness, and he's a bit of a character, but he's the one who basically designed the company around its culture, and the other part of what Zappos is doing in the recruiting side is Tony Say is fully cognizant of it and fully supportive of it. So there's a top-down focus on the fact that we need to emphasize what we do when we bring people in, right on those first days in that onboarding. And if we make mistakes or they make mistakes, let's fix them then, take our hit, and move on. And that way what we have left is an extraordinary fan base of employees who really care about what they're doing, have chosen to be here, and are totally focused on customer service.
Fantastic. Well, I guess it's a company that people from over here should have a look at and see what they're doing, both as a company but as recruiters. Now, we mentioned communities before, Gerry, and again, just a quick reset. This is the Rec Hangout with Gerry Crispin from the U.S. CareerXroads and the Candidate Experience Awards, and Alan Whitford here having a chat with Gerry on the Rec Hangout, hashtag REC Hangout. Pop your questions in, and Louise will get them into the conversation for us. And I think that's... we've talked about communities, we talked about agencies. One of the questions that was put to me before the chat was whether or not the contingency model, is that normally at the heart of the bad recruitment experience? The way the company's just focused on contingency recruitment. What do you think about that?
Boy, that could be a long conversation. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, though. Let's tackle that a little bit. Mm-hmm. What happens in the good times when there's growth in the United States, for example? Contingency agencies begin to open day by day, and the number of people working in contingency grows to enormous numbers. And the reason it does is because there's almost no entry. I mean, anybody almost in the United States, almost anybody can come into a third-party recruiting organization, placement organization, or hang out a shingle that they're a recruiter and operate. And that is where the problem is. There are some extraordinary recruiters who operate on a contingent model. Pay me when I produce. I got no problem with that. But there are also probably 80 to 90% of the folks who are in that business who are not in that business 6 months or a year later. So there's a flow through of people in the contingency business who think that this is the way to make money, and by and large, what they're trying to do is the most is in effect sell bodies really, really quick, and that means a lot of activity, but not a lot of focus on satisfying the needs of the individuals who are in that supply chain. And so, the more people I can get, the more people I can deal with, the more paper I can spread. The more folks I can contact, the more networks I can make. It's all about that, and that's not, in my opinion, a way to make a career that's satisfying. And I've worked in, there's nothing I haven't done. I'm old enough that I've actually done all this shit, and so I got to tell you, I know the pain of working in a contingent operation, as well as executive search.
Yeah. So let's carry this on to one of the other topics that, of course, you can't talk about recruitment and not talk about this today, which is any of the sort of the social channels. And with a lot of companies now moving to the direct sourcing model, more so in the U.S. than here, but very prominent, and LinkedIn and so forth. But they're using LinkedIn to connect with lots and lots of people who may or may not yet be interested in even hearing from them. Do we run the risk of actually creating a set of pissed off potential candidates because we've been, we're hammering them from our LinkedIn profile. They don't know who we are. They don't know why we want to do it. The recruiter who's making that communication to them hasn't actually explained anything. They're just saying, hey, look at us, come join us, with no context. Are you seeing that in the research as well?
Not as much. What we're seeing is that LinkedIn currently is the choice of the day. So they're the 800-pound gorilla of the day. The question is whether or not LinkedIn is being used as much as a social media tool, where both job seekers and recruiters, so not just the recruiters, but job seekers, use the tool to find people in the companies that obviously have jobs. And from the recruiter point of view, are they really researching candidates and engaging them to the extent that that everybody talks about, or are they primarily using LinkedIn as a job board? And the answer is really a little of both. When you look at the broader context, more companies are using LinkedIn more as a job board than they are as a direct sourcing tool. But for the certain critical functions in perhaps program development, etc., the people with very highly specialized skills who can be identified certainly are becoming overwhelmed with recruiters trying to get their attention. But that happened in the past too. Even with phones, that old thing called phones. If you happen to have one by your desk, it kept ringing if you happen to have all those particular skills. People were trying to get through to you. So I do think that more and more individuals are figuring out ways to minimize the the extra phone calls, the extra in-mails, the extra whatever, and people will move to something else. There's a tool, an interesting variation on that theme. I don't know if you've seen it, Inside Connector, which is sort of a email with a video component to it that has been getting a higher return rate, if you will. But everything goes through a cycle, so we'll see something else probably soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's go back to the candidate experience and process bit for a moment. Again, I'm referring back to some of the experiences my brother-in-law has gone through, which is the use of a variety of pre-screening mechanisms. Hey, we think you might be interested in our company. You apply here, you fill out the basic stuff, but then boom, now you got to take the psychometric test. Now you got to take the verbal and numerical reasoning. Now you got to test your family details. Now we got to go through a criminal records check. And geez, I don't even know if I want to apply to the job yet. Because you haven't given me enough data on that. But you've made me go through what feels like days worth of stuff, but it isn't really, but it feels like that. Once I get all that done, and then you go, oh, okay, now you can apply, I'm kind of feeling like, geez, I feel like I already did that. I get the need from the hiring company's perspective to do some screening out of really non-relevant candidates. How do you see the companies trying to strike a happy balance there, or is it still work in progress?
Well, this is definitely a work in progress. So some companies just went totally out of bounds. Google was one that went totally out of bounds. If you tried to apply to Google 2-3 years ago, it probably would have taken you an hour or more, probably 90 minutes, to complete any application at all. And that would be followed by a whole series of other tests that go on. That's not to say they've improved totally, but they've started to realize that they weren't getting any really good value from that. In the United States, we probably do less psychometric testing and upfront testing than other countries for any number of reasons, but we're starting to do more of it. And now the issue is, okay, at what point should we be doing this? Should all be part of pre-screening, Or should this be a dance in which I tell you something about me, you tell me something about you, we decide to go forward, we set some expectations, you do a little bit more, and I do a little bit more. Listen, if I'm going to, I've always been pretty obnoxious from my own point of view as a job seeker. And so if somebody said, I would like to know these things about you, and they have to do with my cultural fit, the values proposition issues, the style of how I collaborate with other people, I'm always willing to do it as long as you tell me about your style. I want to know the hiring manager's style for how he or she manages. I want to know how his or her team collaborates, because I'm making a choice as well. So the moment you start telling me that I have to supply you with data from a testing point of view is the point at which I, as the candidate, would like to know a little bit more about what the results of that are for me, so I can do better in the future, as well as how I can make my own match with you. And companies need to be able to move in that direction more than eliminating, for example, those testing.
I think you're right, and I know that my brother-in-law, once his big complaint about it was not that you're going to test me or ask me or put me through that stuff, but it was where it happened. You know,
Alan, you need to get your brother-in-law a job is what you need to do.
Yeah, I know. I've been trying desperately, trust me. You know, he's married to my sister. I want him to have a job. But, you know, I mean, his challenge is, if you ask me all that stuff before I've even really got into the job application, I don't know if I want the job or if I'm, you know, relevant to the job itself. You maybe do all this stuff first. Actually, get me to become a candidate, you know, become a real candidate, not, you know, become a real applicant, whichever way we want to swing that terminology around, so that I'm actually know I'm in the process. Then ask me that stuff.
Let me give you another. Let me give you another piece of data that might be useful for your brother-in-law. Having to do with the candidate experience. So here's what one of the things we're learning. About half of the people who apply for jobs in North America. So I'm going to deal with North America. You can think of this in terms of the UK because it you know, to a greater or lesser degree. But in America, half of all the people who apply do not know that the company that they're applying for has an employee referral program. They don't know. There's no information on the career site. There's no information at all that it exists. And of those who do know, only 1/3 of them, so about 15 to 17%, actually think the employee referral is important. So 2/3 don't even do anything about it, right? Yeah. So here's some data. 125 people on average apply to each job. I'm going to use the number 100 for just simplicity. But 100 people apply to the job. On average, only 4 people have an employee referral. Of that 100, half of all the people who apply are not qualified, which leaves you 50 people who are qualified, and 2 of which have an employee referral. The recruiter will, in fact, at that point, take those 50, and I'm, you know, stretching the boundaries of all this, but take the 50 and narrow the 50 down to a reasonable number that they can bring in as a slate or considered finalists. And so they want to get it down to about 5 as quickly as possible. Interestingly enough, in almost every case, among the 5 are those 2 employee referrals. And on average, that would mean that 40% of all the hires were employee referrals. Now, if you do a probability calculation, if you apply to a job and an employee in that company refers you, your chance of getting hired is 1 in 5. Cool. If, in fact, you do not have an employee referral, your chance is 1.2%. The difference is 14 times. And I will tell you that that exists even if a third party is placing you. If a third party, if a recruiter, an external recruiter, places me into the company to have a conversation, I get to the finalist stage, I am more likely to get the job if I also have an employee in the company who says they refer me. It enhances the third party's capability of getting that person in. So the importance of an employee referral is second to none. There is no other way to game the system. And if you look at how applicant tracking systems build their algorithms and present data to the recruiter using the importance of employee referral as a primary means to stack rank candidates who have all the skills, knowledge, and experience, you can also see how the system is gamed that way. So the data that we're getting demonstrates beyond anything else that employee referrals is not only critical, but is one of the most essential ingredients in getting a job. We've always known that intuitively, but we have the data now demonstrated. And if social media impacts candidates who get better coaching and learn more about how they could get and initiate an employee referral for themselves, you will have not 4 but 8 or 12 people out of the 100 with an employee referral, and 100% of all the people who are hired will likely be employee referrals.
That's brilliant, and I think that's a brilliant thing to take out to candidates, as you said, to help them figure this out a little bit better. Gerry, we're nearing the end of our hour. We got a couple more questions, but Thomas, if you're out there listening, we probably don't have time to get this to Gerry now, but Gerry, we'll send these questions on to you. Maybe you'll be able to help us answer them after the event, and Louise can put it in her post-event blog. Gerry, if you had to, I guess. We've talked about the candidate experience, and I think you've just had a brilliant piece there for what could help candidates do things better. What would be your key sort of 1 or 2 or 3 takeaways for companies that they really need to do to actually have a primary and premier candidate experience?
I think the first thing was one of the things we talked about right at the beginning, which is that in your application, in each of the screening approaches that you have, and in your final interview process, I think it's essential to train recruiters that each and every time at the very end of that conversation, provide an opportunity for the candidate to add whatever they think from their skills, knowledge, and experience is critical for them to compete for that job. By opening that up, you create a perception that will totally enhance the candidate experience. I think the other suggestion I would make strongly is that can you make 1 or 2 promises and deliver on them? If you promise that the application will be less than 15 minutes, find out. If you want to promise that on average this job is filled within 5 weeks, and that we will contact you in no more than 5 weeks and let you know the status or that the job has been filled, then make that promise and then deliver on it. I'm convinced that if we set expectations more effectively, and then double check to make sure that we delivered on those expectations, we would tighten up our recruiting processes enormously from a candidate experience point of view. Even if it's bad news, I would rather promise that I will give you the bad news within this framework and then deliver against that, rather than a black hole.
Yeah, and I think, Gerry, that leads to the one thing that I would say, foremost above everything, just communicate. just tell me what the heck is going to happen. Tell me where I am in the process. You're going to make me happy, and you and your recruiter is going to be happier. But that also goes internally, doesn't it? Because we keep thinking about this outward-facing stuff, but if we haven't done the same conversations with our hiring managers and gotten them on board that this is our open communications process, then it's going to be a bad candidate experience on both sides of the equation, isn't it?
Without a doubt.
Yeah, Gerry, it's been absolutely brilliant. I want to thank you for joining us today on the Rec Hangout. Thanks to Louis for making sure that everything worked for us, and Louise keeping the questions going. Louis, any sort of final things you want to add in terms of what we're doing next? And by the way, Gerry, where can people find you?
Well, if you spell my name with a G, Gerry Crispin, you probably can find me by typing that into Google, and I'm there. I'm around. What can I tell you? It's not hard to find you at any point in time. And on LinkedIn, I stick my phone number there. So I respond to every email. I respond to phone calls. I feel blessed that I have the opportunity to engage as many people as I do. So. It's a fun time.
Well, and you're proof that you can live out in the boondocks, Gerry, and still be part of the world.
Exactly.
We'll stick your details on our follow-up email, but I'm sure anyone watching this will be able to find you on Google. Thanks so much, Gerry. In terms of our next Hangout, it's on the 16th of July. We've got Agent Tracy joining us. He's been on the Rec Hangout before. He's the COO of Arrows Group. They're a very interesting company. And we've got Roy Ripper, recruitment training expert. He's a regular viewer, actually, Roy Ripper, so it'd be nice to have him on here finally. We're actually discussing boom after bust, how to take the advantage of the upturn in the context of recruitment. That's actually a follow-up to Louise's UK Recruiter Director's networking event tomorrow afternoon in London. If you're interested in a ticket to that event and you're watching and you're based in London, get in touch with me. You'll be very welcome. Adrian and Roy are speaking there. Graham Reed is also speaking there as well. So that should be a very good event. Also, later we just found out that there's actually another webinar being hosted by Johnny Campbell of Social Talent on the Candidate Experience. So it's a weird afternoon of webinars for Candidate Experience. That's at 4 o'clock. The website is socialtalent.co. So head to that if you want to hear some more. Or furthermore, Louise will be sending the usual follow-up blog that will appear on the UK Recruiter blog. That'll be highlighting some of Gerry's finest points that he's made, including a few links to some more information and articles that we can gather. And so you're about to say something, Gerry?
I should mention the website, thecandies.org. You can find white papers there on what we've been doing in the United States as well as the UK, and it would be easy to download them. It's all free.
Can you access all the data of the last, the analysis? You can, can't you?
Yes.
So that's all there. That's all available. And get in touch
if you like reading, it's the last two papers have been about 65 pages. So I'm going to warn you ahead of time. You may want to first download it and then scan all of the pictures.
That's why we do these hangouts, so people don't have to read; they can just watch it. Anyway,
and by the way, people trying to find candies, it's spelled Candes.
Yep.
Not candy like sweets.
Yep.
On that point, I think that's everything, guys. So thanks so much, Gerry, and thank you, Alan, for hosting as always. And we'll sign off. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having me.